Hello, friends. Welcome back to Resistance Live. It is the 21st of April, 2025, and I am back from a week away. Nice to see you all here. I unfortunately came back with an injury, but I'm surviving. I have a major rib contusion thanks to snowboarding with my kids, but that's a story for another time. Not a quiet news week, right? I mean, I think that's fair to say. There was so much that happened while I was gone. We're going to talk about at least the most recent events of it, including what's going on with Pete Hegseth, etc. Where, honestly, the calls for his removal and or resignation are very loud today, in addition to everything that kind of has happened overnight. So we'll get to that in a second. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a blue button-down blouse. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman. And I am in my office in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart as usual, and coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan land. We are going to have a big announcement, by the way, at the end of this broadcast. So make sure you stay tuned until the end, because there's some programming notes that you all are going to want to be aware of. Okay. So let's talk about Hegseth to begin with. So yesterday we learned that there was a second Signal chat in which Hegseth's brother, wife, lawyer, and 9 other people were communicating in advance of his confirmation as the Secretary of Defense, and into which he disclosed the same classified information that had been disclosed in the first Signal chat that accidentally included the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He has a much harder case to be made here that this was all an accident. Obviously, knowing that people who do not have highly classified security clearance are inside a chat and giving them information about your intent to bomb a foreign country is not something that is ordinarily considered to be, a qualification to run the Pentagon, the largest military force in the world. In addition to that, we have serious concerns now about what's happening inside the Pentagon itself. If you have been paying attention, within the last week, three senior Pentagon officials have resigned, all of whom were previously in Pete Hegseth's court, including one who wrote an op-ed about the fact that Pete Hegseth is incredibly dangerous in terms of his leadership of the U.S. military. So this is a very good day. You all know I like to give you action steps day in and day out. This is a very good day to call your reps and your senators and make your voices heard on this. Let them know that you think Pete Hegseth should resign or be impeached, by the way, which is another option. We're at a point right now where, and I'm not alone in saying this, former enlisteds like Charlotte Clymer and others have made this point over and over again, that if any other person handled classified information inside the military in the manner in which Pete Hegseth had, not only would they be removed from their position, but they would be court-martialed. I mean, it's to the point now where he has endangered the lives of U.S. troops. He has given out information to people who do not have security clearance, which is, a violation of a whole host of federal laws. And at this point, he should be gone. So I would say make your phone calls. And, I have to say that I have these moments in relation to this, because y'all know I work with a lot of people who struggle with their own imposter complex. This man, in addition to his multitude of affairs and his allegations against him of rape and his very obvious alcoholism, has now twice that we know of taken actions that made the positions of our troops and military actions made them incredibly vulnerable to foreign intervention and threaten lives fundamentally. And that's on top of the fact that, we're undertaking the bombing of civilians in Yemen, which is not anything new. It happened under both Democratic and Republican presidents. But seriously, this is not something that any competent military official would ever do or ever even contemplate doing. So he's, Chris Hayes said yesterday it was incredibly reckless to make him the Secretary of Defense. And that is very, very clear at this point. He needs to go. So make your phone calls today. All right. The Dow Jones is down, at least as of the moment where I hit the broadcast button, by over 1,000 points today. We continue to have plummeting financial sector issues, thanks to all of the many tariffs, which are not gone, and the various impact that it's having on trade. I have to tell you that, if you have been paying attention to this, you know that there have been anecdotal reports about the fact that the movement in and out of the port of San Francisco is at almost nothing. If you've lived in the Bay Area, you know that one of the things is true, by the way, for the Port of Los Angeles as well, because I used to live near there, that, there is a routine tons of tankers coming in and out all the time. You can see them from the beach, right? Dozens upon dozens just like lined up waiting to get into the port. The anecdotal reports are that, trade to the West Coast is gone. And that is going to have very serious implications to the supply chain, in addition to the economy, right? That's on top of all of the various cuts that are being made, the jobs that continue to be cut, everything the Doge is doing that is actually not benefiting the federal government financially, but is having a huge impact on employment and services and everything else. All of this is deeply disturbing. And I will just say, somebody on the Patreon feed this morning asked me a question about whether or not impeachment might now potentially be in the offing of Trump. Now, I have to remind you all, I still think it's a little bit of wishful thinking, because the House is obviously controlled by Republicans, and insurrection, not insurrection, although, it did start in the House, but nonetheless, impeachment has to start in the House at the House Judiciary Committee, and it has to get out of committee to the floor in order for impeachment to even get a vote. So it would have to be a scenario where a percentage of the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee realized that they were really in deep at this point with regard to the damage that Trump was doing to the country. Now, we continue to have these crazy things happening with conservative media figures and others, and also like some representatives and senators, finally publicly voicing the horrific nature of what Trump is doing right now to the federal government and in the context of human rights. More on that coming up in a minute. And there's starting to be a bit of a wake-up call that, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Maybe Trump isn't actually acting in the best interests of the country or the best interests of like all the people in it. And yes, we can talk about the irony of, them waiting until it came to their doorstep in the form of an economic downturn. We can talk about Lisa Murkowski's comments, which I have to say I frankly found incredibly offensive. Like, I know we need everybody in our camp. We need as many resistors as we can get. We need everybody working together. But I'm just going to say this, okay? I think that if you are an elected official and you are too scared of what's happening in the country to do your job, you should resign. Full stop. If you feel like you are being silenced because you're afraid of Donald Trump's supporters, you should quit. And the people of your state should be able to elect somebody who actually gives a good goddamn enough to fight. Because I'll tell you something else. My problem with this is that everybody who's in my position has received death threats, right? Every single commentator that who's out there doing work on progressive issues, every single organizer, every single person who is in the process of doing things like the protests that happened on Saturday, the heads of Indivisible, the heads of Move On. You think we're not subject to death threats day in and day out? And we can't afford private security, and we're still here, right? So, part of my concern right now is that we have to be in a situation where like enough people come together to fight. And if we don't have that, and if it's not bipartisan, then none of this can really be stopped in its tracks, save by the courts. Again, more on that in a minute. So, look, I will say that I think we are closer to impeachment than we might have been a week ago. Do I think it's highly likely at this point? No. I still think we're looking at like maybe a 10% chance that could happen in, let's say, like the next 3 months. But again, not entirely impossible. All right. And I'm going to say one other thing here, which I just think everybody should think about. The calls that you make every day to your representatives and your senators, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum, should include demands that they fight for the people who elected them, right? Fight for the rights of the people who elected them. Fight for the financial security of the people who elected them. Nobody, again, this has been my mantra since January 20th. Nobody voted for Elon Musk, right? That should be an insistence in every phone call that you make. All right. And I'm going to say one other thing, just in case anybody's wondering. Of course, we're all scared, right? It's not like the people like me who are out here doing this work aren't afraid of ending up in an El Salvador and gulag. Of course we are. I've had to have conversations with my children about it, but I'm still here, right? So, this kind of stuff, I have to say that I feel like the credit that was given to Lisa Murkowski for this comment, I was just like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. So you're admitting that like every other person that you're scared and that's a justification for staying silent? Like feel the fear and do it anyway. It's kind of like a mantra of like professional development. Maybe it's time that the members of Congress and the Senate apply it. So, that's my 2 cents on that. Okay, let's talk about what happened with the Supreme Court over the weekend. Very weird. Very unprecedented. So the Supreme Court at 1 a.m., I guess it was like Friday night, Saturday morning, issued an emergency order that essentially stopped the Trump administration from sending anybody else to El Salvador without due process. Just stopped it altogether. You can't send anybody out of the country right now. And this order was really strange. It was a 7-2 ruling, meaning that the only dissenters were Thomas and Alito, and it did not wait for Alito to write a dissent. I'm just going to say something about this. Again, I'll remind you all, I graduated from law school in 1997, almost 30 years ago now. I have never seen an order like this, where it was so urgent that they issued the order without waiting for the dissent to be written. What that tells me is that Roberts or someone else inside the court raised the specter that Alito would slow walk his dissent to allow more people to be sent to the concentration camp. I think this is also an indicator, because we don't know where this is going to come out once the Fifth Circuit rules. This is a case involving removing people from Texas to El Salvador. We don't know where this is going to come out in the long run, because it's going to go up to the Supreme Court on the merits. But it is a bit of a tell that it was 7-2. And keep in mind that this follows the order that the administration has to take as to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States, when they have essentially refused to do that. And not just refused to do it, but have essentially laughed in the Supreme Court's face about it on social media through official White House posts. So I will just say that, tea leaf reading is not always an accurate game, but I will tell you the fact that we had a 7-2 decision with an emergency injunction issued at 1 a.m. on a weekend that didn't wait for Alito's dissent, which, by the way, came out yesterday, is a sign, and a very serious sign, that the Supreme Court is done effing around. And again, we're going to have to see how this plays out, because, I, like anybody else, don't really trust Roberts or Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett as far as I could throw them. But, or Gorsuch for that matter, but, they all joined in the majority opinion that stopped the deportation. And that in and of itself is a huge deal. So again, we don't know where this is going to land when it gets to the merits. But for now, it's very significant. And this is one reason, by the way, why you have conservative pundits like Jesse Kelly out there saying he's got to defy the Supreme Court. He issued this crazy statement. Not that Jesse Kelly is ever terribly coherent, but he essentially said, we've got to defy the Supreme Court or we're going to have a dictator, as if defying the Supreme Court of the United States doesn't indicate that you're living in a dictatorship, right? But they are all now calling on the administration to essentially just defy the court. And so the real question now is what's going to happen with regard to contempt, because not only does Judge Boasberg have contempt lined up now based on his ruling last week that he was inclined to fine for criminal contempt. It hasn't happened yet. There's a hearing early this week on that. With regard to their refusal to turn the planes around in the first place when they were headed to El Salvador. But also the Supreme Court has the capacity to hold people in contempt. And, I've been saying for a very long time, we're at constitutional crisis moment. This, my friends, is it. I mean, it kind of doesn't get any more high stakes than this. So we will have to see exactly how this all plays out. But I will tell you that I think that this is a positive sign. I said to everybody, I will take it. It's not perfect, but I will take it, because it is an indication that at least 7 of the Supreme Court justices are just fed up and done. They know that if people are being deported to a third-party country without due process to even establish whether or not they're guilty of something that would allow them to be removed from the country in the first place, let alone to a third-party country, which is a whole other ball of wax. That's not deportation. That's extraordinary rendition. Then, they realize that it could happen to anyone. And so, again, we're going to have to see how this plays out. But that was a very, very big moment. Okay. Speaking of El Salvador, I came back with a little bit of a sore throat too, you guys. Sorry. Bukele, the president of El Salvador, announced yesterday that he was going to try to cut a deal with Venezuela. This is really weird. So weird that I actually didn't want to comment on it when I first saw the news about it, because I was like, what game is he playing here? Essentially, what he has offered to do is transfer the Venezuelans who came from the United States into SCOTUS to Venezuela in exchange for political prisoners of El Salvador, what he called political prisoners. I'm not convinced that's what they are, that are being held in Venezuelan prisons. So the question that is out there looming about this is, well, there's a number of questions, but one of them is, would the Venezuelans who were returned to Venezuela then be free citizens in Venezuela, as they should be, right? Like, they're citizens of Venezuela. If ordinarily when you're deported to your home country, you still get to have a life. You don't go to prison. Is that what he's suggesting? Or is he suggesting that they will be incarcerated in Venezuela instead? In which case we are in a whole new human trafficking question. Because these are people who never should have been removed from in the first place from the United States, sent to a concentration camp in El Salvador, now being traded for people that Bukele wants to Venezuela. So that's one big question, and I don't think those details have been answered yet. And then the second thing that I think we have to ask about this is why. Now, I will say that when Chris Van Hollen went to El Salvador and met with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is now not at SCOTUS, although they won't tell anybody where he is now. He's in some other prison. One of the things that Chris Van Hollen said when he came back was, I'm paraphrasing, but this was a very interesting moment in the press conference when he returned at Dulles. He said, I want President Bukele to think about how this looks. You want El Salvador to be a home for technology. You want El Salvador to be trading Bitcoin on the blockchain. You want El Salvador to be a place where business wants to invest. And you're going to run a concentration camp for the United States? You think that's going to make anybody want to give you anything? So my question is whether or not that comment has now resulted in Bukele realizing that maybe he's not in bed with the right people. But nonetheless, we don't know how this is going to play out. And obviously, we all know at this point what Bukele's people did in the context of propaganda with this. Those fake glasses with the cherry on the stem, pretending they were drinking margaritas, wanting them to be by the pool, filming it in a hotel dining room as if, Kilmar Abrego Garcia wasn't like chained, beaten, and had his head shaved in a concentration camp. Who knows? Okay. But people should be aware that there's something in this deal that is starting to fall apart. And again, we don't know how it's all going to fall apart in the end, if it's all going to fall apart in the end, because we also had that Oval Office meeting where they were buds, Trump and Bukele. But, look, something's not hanging together in this right now. And the question is, how is it going to disintegrate if it does? Definitely something to watch. All right. Somebody asked me a question about David Hogg's announced strategy of primarying Democrats who are not fighting back against the administration. I will remind you all that David Hogg, along with my friend Malcolm Kenyatta, are now vice presidents of the DNC, or rather vice chairs of the DNC. And one of the things that David Hogg has talked about is the need for essentially like new blood in Democratic leadership. And, no less than, like the most senior, well-observed pundits, including a certain Southern gentleman whose name we all know, lost their minds over this. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you what my thoughts on this are. I think anybody who's not fighting back should be primaried. Full stop. And I think the people who are listening right now to the pundit class, and I include in this Gretchen Whitmer, I include in this Gavin Newsom, are getting their asses handed to them because they do not recognize the degree of outrage, the demand for fighting back, the pressure that everyday people are putting on elected Democrats right now to try to stand up and do the right thing. Like, why did we elect these people if they're not fighting back against like what is fundamentally the execution of a coup d'etat? Why are they in office? So I think David Hogg is doing the exact right thing by suggesting this, because by the way, the thing that is being missed by many of these pundits is that this too is a pressure tactic. If you say to people, we are going to frickin' primary you if you don't stand up and fight back against Trump and Elon Musk, maybe people will wake up to the fact that like they're going to lose their jobs and they'll actually start doing them in the first place. So, my view on this is that it's absolutely necessary to put pressure on the Democratic leadership and Democratic electeds generally in any way that we can. I think, by the way, what Chris Van Hollen did has shown Democrats what courage looks like. There's 4 more Democrats in El Salvador today, including like Maxwell Frost, Robert Garcia, who I adore, a number of the younger generation are down there today, again, advocating for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Fantastic. Like they should be. And this may be a wake-up call, along with other forms of pressure tactics, to get elected Democrats to do the right thing. I think it's great. I'm not opposed to David Hogg doing this, frankly. And I think that, the people who are losing their minds because they're losing their influence. Like, that's really what it's about. People are realizing that, like, the pundit consultant class that have advised Democrats over the years, that have tried to push the Democratic Party as recently as November toward the center, have failed. And so once again, this is a moment of people like clinging on by their fingernails to the old way of doing things because they don't want to become irrelevant when frankly they should be made irrelevant. So that's my 2 cents on that. Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked me to define the rule of law. This is a very interesting question because the rule of law, that idea is essentially like a term of art, meaning that it's something that's defined in, like, you could look it up in Black's Law Dictionary if you wanted to, and I'm sure there's some kind of definition of it in there. But essentially, it's the idea that if the law is not equitably applied, the law doesn't exist. If you don't actually stand up for what's written as the law, for statutes and the common law, which is what comes down through precedent, essentially, democracy dies. So when you're talking about standing up for the rule of law, what you're talking about is standing up for the fair application of the law to everyone, and for the idea that the means by which the law is applied in this country have to withstand pressure. That's essentially what it means. So, for anybody who's asking that question, you can Google it. I didn't bother doing that. Like, I don't really think that's going to be terribly helpful. But essentially, it means standing up for the idea. If you're standing up for the rule of law, you're standing up for the application of the law to everyone through our courts and the observance of the law. All right. So I hope that's helpful to that. The Pope died. I think everybody knows that. I was laughing at all the many, many jokes this morning on Blue Sky about the fact that J.D. Vance was the last public official to meet with the Pope. If you haven't checked out all the humor that's being written about that, because he met with the Pope yesterday, checked out all of that, you should go look at it because it'll give you a good laugh for today. We're in conclave season now. I love that film. I know many of you did as well, but we'll see when we get a new Pope. And I hope that it's somebody who's at least trying to move the church in a progressive direction, as this Pope did. This Pope was a lot more welcoming to LGBTQ people, to women. Yes, I know there are people like, oh, he gave cover to the reactionary parts of the church, but he was not Pope Benedict, who, by the way, forgave child molesters. So we'll see what happens next on this. That's just something to be aware of today. Okay. Final thing that I wanted to mention today, and then we'll have our little announcement, which I hope you will all stay tuned for. Somebody raised the fact that yesterday was the day that the Insurrection Act was allegedly supposed to be invoked. So I'm just going to tell you all that I told you so, not in a mean way, but many, many times over the last couple of weeks, I said to everyone that April 20th date is arbitrary. Essentially the executive order asked for Kristi Noem and Tom Homan and others to file a report with the president within 90 days of the inauguration, advising on the state of the border and whether or not the Insurrection Act should be invoked. And they didn't file a report. There's some reporting on CNN that what they plan to file will not recommend an invocation of the Insurrection Act. So, for everybody who was kind of panicking about this and saying like martial law, this was a fairly easy call, I think, on my part, that it wasn't likely to happen. And, I also just want to say one other thing to everyone, because the question was asked in this context. Well, now we don't have to worry about what he's going to do to protesters. False. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but, the dude is a demented, malignant narcissist. He could decide to invoke the Insurrection Act at any time, as I said many times over the last couple of weeks. He could wake up one morning and be like, it's Insurrection Act Day, just like Liberation Day was the day for the tariffs. He could do any number of crazy things and invoke it, okay? Whether or not it would stand up in the courts, because they declared a national emergency, if you'll remember, in the first administration, and that didn't hold up in the courts, is anybody's guess, all right? But I'm not saying it to make anybody afraid of protesting, because, protests continue and it's great. And this is played out in a way that has been much more positive and optimistic than I think a lot of us were looking at it on January 20th. All that said, you got to be clear-headed about this and keep your eyes open. Like, the thing about narcissists that is totally predictable is that they're always unpredictable. And so we don't know what he's going to do or when he's going to do it or whether or not he'll invoke the Insurrection Act or whether or not he won't. What we do know is that the 20th was an arbitrary deadline, and it wasn't likely some big hammer was going to drop yesterday on Easter Sunday as a result. So, it is what it is. And, I think that the good news is that he hasn't invoked it yet. And he could invoke it tomorrow, and we'll have to deal with that when and if it comes. Okay, that's it for today, but I do have a bit of an announcement, so please stay tuned. Many of you saw that we did last week our first standalone training video on organizing in the current moment. That particular video was about how to organize your people even when it feels like the world is falling apart. We are, as I have now been signaling for a number of weeks, we are going to be doing more of those standalone pre-recorded training videos here because it gives you all the kind of like leadership and organizing skills that you need to actually make a difference in this moment. And so that's going to mean something for our schedule here. And that is what the announcement is right now, because the team and I, even though I was away last week, spent some time talking about all of this, because as many of you know, and particularly our Patreon subscribers know, this thing of broadcasting 6 days a week, which I have been doing now literally for like at least 5 years, I think, has really started to take a toll on me in this particular incarnation. So here's what our new schedule is going to look like. Every Monday, you are going to get a pre-recorded standalone video. And it will drop at noon, just like the broadcast, but that will be every Monday. I will not be live broadcasting on Mondays starting next week. Live broadcasts, however, will remain Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you're going to get 4 live broadcasts a week. And then if you are a Patreon subscriber, many of you already know that this is coming. We are moving what has been our weekend bonus broadcast, which was Progressive Coffee Hour, to what will now be known as Progressive Happy Hour on Friday afternoons. So I will actually be doing 2 broadcasts on Fridays, one which will be the regular live broadcast for the public, and then a second afternoon broadcast, which I think is going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern, which will be Progressive Happy Hour. This, by the way, will give me my weekends back with my children. It will give me Mondays to work on all the great things that we're doing behind the scenes, and for our clients to train people to really have a really big impact right now. Many of you know we've been working in that direction. And so starting next week, just to repeat, Monday will be pre-recorded standalone training video, which next week is actually going to be about why you should stop arguing with Trumpers online. That one's very funny. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. That will come a week from today. And then live broadcast Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Bonus broadcast for Patreon subscribers on Friday afternoon in the form of Progressive Happy Hour. You are welcome to bring beverages if you would care to do that. You all know I don't drink alcohol, but I'll bring my tea. That will be our schedule going forward. And the thing I will just say about this is that it has taken, in the first 3 months of this administration, the toll of doing the 6 days a week, the toll it has taken on my family has been like very extreme, because my kids are really, aware of everything that's going on in the world. And my having to work on Sundays and to be completely immersed really 6 full days a week in the news has made me really stressed out and burnt out, and not, to be really candid about it, like the best parent I could be, because I'm in it so much. So this is a decision that we're making so that I can be here with you. So you're still going to get me 5 days a week. One of them will just be pre-recorded, and our Patreon subscribers will get me twice on Fridays. So I hope that's good for everyone. I will see you all here live tomorrow. We will be live all 5 days this week. And then next Monday is when we will start with pre-recorded stuff. So as I just said, I think Progressive Coffee Hour, which is now going to be Progressive Happy Hour, will likely be around 3 o'clock Eastern on Friday afternoons. But stay tuned for that. I will let the Patreon subscribers know about that directly. And that's that. So mad gratitude to all of you for your ongoing support. Appreciate so much all of you who dropped me comments this morning about how glad you were that I took time off. Even though I came back with a badly contused rib, it's okay. And I will see you all back here live tomorrow. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.